Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
Good afternoon and a warm welcome to you all. Thanks for being here. Just a reminder, we are on air. Sign up there, so it's been recorded as well, and we welcome those that may be listening at home or in their office, wherever they may be. Welcome to you as well. And mobile phones, if you have them, if you could have them switched off, as it can interfere with the recording. So with that, please be seated. Thank you. I do have two apologies. Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Cox and Councillor Finlay may be a few minutes late, but still planning to be here. Declaration of interest. Confirmation of the minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the held on the 5th of September. Deputy Mayor moved. Councillor Soward seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Now it's a pleasure to be able to welcome Commissioner Leanne McLean. There she is, sitting over there. Welcome. You may come forward. I think it's probably a good place to come. Probably need the microphone too, I would have thought, for the recording purpose. This one here, or do you want to use the one at the back or the one here? I think the one here is probably just as good. Just put it closer to your mouth, just for our recording purposes. So, thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here today to speak about my role as the Commissioner for Children and Young People. I'd like to begin by paying my respects to the traditional and original owners of the land that we stand on, the Palawa people of Lutruwita, Tasmania, and to any Palawa people who are here today. The Palawa people of Tasmania have faced invasion and dispossession, and they go on today to practice a thriving contemporary culture. So a question I'm often asked is, what do you actually do? What does the Commissioner for Children and Young People do? And is it all right if I pop my notes on here?
No
Thank
worries.
you. I'm an independent statutory authority established under an Act of Parliament called the Commissioner for Children and Young Persons Act, and it was last taken through the Parliament in 2016. We've had many commissioners. I'm about the fifth or sixth, I think. And commissioners are appointed for a 5-year term, and I was appointed in November of last year. So I've been in the job now for about 9 months. So the role's established under its own Act of Parliament, and at its very essence, my role is to promote and protect the rights and well-being of Tasmania's children and young people. And that is the age of 0 right through until they turn 18. So a common misconception is that the Commissioner's role goes through to 25. That's the case in some other jurisdictions, but not here in Tasmania. We are the traditional sense of the term children under the legal age of 18. So my general functions are set out in the Act, and they include systemic advocacy for all children on a systemic level, and individual advocacy for children and young people who are detained under the Youth Justice Act. So I spend personally quite a bit of time at Ashley Youth Detention Centre, and people who find themselves detained there can call on me to help them if they need help, and I personally will give them a hand if I can. In relation to other children and young people, this is a systemic role. So I can look at the systems and processes embedded in our society and how they impact on children and young people, but I can't take on individual advocacy issues unless I'm asked to by the Minister. I also have a role in researching, investigating and influencing legislation and policy in relation to children and young people in Tasmania, and promoting and monitoring and reviewing the well-being of children and young people in Tasmania, and most importantly, because it's fundamental to everything, including the important role that you have, promoting and empowering the participation of young people in decisions which impact on them. And I understand that you would make decisions that impact on young people every day. And often it's quite challenging for us to think about how we engage young people in that decision-making process. We don't necessarily need to charge them with making the decision, although sometimes that is appropriate, but we need to find out what they think to be able to make sure we're making a decision which is in fact in their best interests. So how do I actually do that? What do I do to go about the role? I take account of the principles of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that convention. It's the most popular convention there is. That it has the most signatories across the globe. Tasmania or Australia is one of them. And that means we have obligations to make sure we promote and protect the rights of children. And I've got those in mind all the time when I do my job. Basically, you can distill it down to 4 things, which are really useful things to keep in mind as you make decisions as counsellors. That is that children have a right to not be discriminated against. They have a right to have their best interests taken into account in every decision that you make. And their best interests can only really be ascertained by including what they think and what their view is. They have a right to thrive, to have everything that they need to have a good life. And they have a right to have a say in all matters that impact on them, just like we do as adults. So who are Tasmania's children and young people? Well, we've got between 112 and 113,000 of them across the state. 22% live in the southeast, 29% in the south and the southwest, 22% in the northwest and 27% up here in the north, and 10.1% of children and young people, based on the most recent ABS statistics, identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And 50% of these children live in local government areas with an index of relative socioeconomic disadvantage, which means they are, by definition, disadvantaged. 50%, so half of them. And I can give you a little bit more information on where those half are. I've got a map that I would have showed you had I given a PowerPoint presentation, but basically it shows that a reasonable proportion of those half who are living in fairly disadvantaged circumstances are living just north of where we are now. Which is outside of this LGA. It's the next LGA, but they're accessing services, including those provided here in Launceston. We also have these same pockets of disadvantage in the northern suburbs of the Greater Hobart area, on the northeast coast, and also down towards the Tasman Peninsula. And these are broad figures produced by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and they tell us a really high-level story about how our children and young people are doing based on income levels and welfare dependence in families. They don't tell the more granular picture of how our children and young people are doing, and the best way to find that out is to get out and speak to them, which is how I conduct a large part of my role. So how are they travelling? Pretty well in many regards. So 88% of women in Tasmania attend their first antenatal visit. That's really important because by attending antenatal visits, it actually means that you're setting yourself and your child up for a really good experience. There's a sustained decline in people smoking while they're pregnant. 90% of families in Tasmania attend their 8-week child health assessment. That is, figures like that are the envy of other jurisdictions. And 80% of our children are developmentally on track. They're doing pretty well. And that's according to an index around early children, so the Australian Early Development Census. In middle childhood and adolescence, the percentage of children and young people smoking, consuming alcohol and illicit drugs is declining. It's actually declining across the Western world. Teenage pregnancy rates are also declining, and 91% of school-aged children and young people are attending school. However, that doesn't account for part-time attendance, which is something I'm quite interested in. And the number of youth offenders is also declining, as well as the numbers of young people in detention in Tasmania over time. So that paints a pretty good picture, but it's not the whole picture. And there are some areas where we have challenges and we really need to think about how we can do better. So 11% of children in Tasmania are what we call developmentally vulnerable on 2 or more indicators of a really important early development check that's undertaken when they're aged between 3 and 5. And we see issues around communication and language and also gross motor skills. Only 1/3 of children are meeting daily physical activity targets in Tasmania. 1/3. 1/3 of 113,000. The rate of deaths of children and young people due to intentional self-harm in Tasmania is higher than the national average. And only 61% of our students are completing Year 12 with a Year 12 attainment certificate. Now, some of you who I've known before this job will know that this is a matter really dear to my heart. And a part of the reason that we have a low attainment rate for Year 12 in Tasmania is that Year 12 hasn't been available in every school. We're on path now to have Year 12 available in every school and reduce that inequity, and that is incredibly important, particularly for students in rural and regional areas. The numbers of children in out-of-home care in Tasmania, which means children who are in foster care or kinship care or residential care, who are being cared for outside of their home because of a statutory intervention, has risen exponentially over the last 5 years, and it now stands at 1,300 Tasmanian children living in out-of-home care. 50% of our children, or 50% of family violence incidents reported to police, there are children present. We know that only about 1 in 8 or 9 incidents are actually reported to police. So it's a fairly safe assumption to say that children are witnessing an awful lot of violence in the home, and that is something that we need to be very focused on. And last year, 1,360 young people aged 15 to 24 presented alone to a specialist homelessness service. So that's 15 to 24. That does not include the young people that we know who are aged between 10 and 15 who are also homeless and alone and outside of the system. And this is something that the government has set a task force up about, that me and others have advocated very strongly for, to help try and find a solution. So it's very pleasing to see that task force, and I'm very much looking forward to the outcomes. So based on that, what am I up to? What am I doing? I've got 5 key areas of work. We have about 8 very busy people in the Office of the Commissioner for Children down in Hobart. And we're out there listening to and promoting the voices of children and young people. Earlier this year, I started the Commissioner for Children and Young Persons Ambassador Program. So it's a legislated requirement that I have a council of young people helping me do my job. When I came to the job, I inherited a council of about 46 young people around Tasmania, and only 7 of them were from the north. I decided there weren't enough young people and there wasn't enough representation from the north. So in collaboration with the Department of Education, Catholic schools and also independent schools, I put the call out to anyone who would like to help me do my job, help make Tasmania a better place for children and young people. I expected about 80. We got 200, over 40 of whom are from the north. So now when I come to Launceston, there are 40 young people aged between 10 and 17 who come and meet me at the library, and we basically talk about what's important to them. And they have told me that there are 7 main priorities in Tasmania that are important to them. And they include education and the opportunities they gain from their education, climate change and the environment, their ability to participate in decisions which impact on them, their safety in their communities, their access to basic services and support. These are all things that are top of mind for the children and young people in your region. And we're now working with them to explore what that means and how they can have influence with decision makers in each of those areas. So on the 4th of October, they'll be joining me with ambassadors from the South and the Northwest here in Launceston in a full-day conference-style workshop, basically so that they can tell decision makers, policy makers and politicians how they think we could improve things in those 7 priority areas. So they'll have an ability to work in breakout groups with the Climate Change Office, with Equal Opportunity Tasmania, with a whole range of organisations influencing the work that they do. And in the afternoon, we'll have a forum with our political leaders and young people so that they can hear firsthand in a two-way exchange about how they think we can make Tasmania a better place for children and young people. Another really important piece of work that we've got underway, and there are 2 more areas that I'll touch on before I leave. I provide an independent monitoring function for our out-of-home care system. So for our 1,300 young people who are in foster care or residential care or kinship care, I'm looking at the system that oversees that and what sort of quality we're providing, whether or not these children and young people have what they need from the state, who is their parent, in order to have a good life. And I'll be releasing my first report into that monitoring function soon. That means I've had the great pleasure of speaking to many children, providers of care, right across the state, and I think we have a better understanding of this system now than we've probably ever had in the past. There's an awful lot of goodwill in the system. There's also a lot of things that we could be doing differently and better. And the third important area of work at the moment is progressing what we call a wellbeing agenda in Tasmania. And that's really saying, what do children and young people in Tasmania need to have a good life? We know what that is because we've defined it. We have a child and youth wellbeing framework which says children and young people in Tasmania need 6 things to have a good life. They need to feel safe and loved. They need to have access to material basics, a connection to their culture, to be able to learn, to have good health, and to participate in decisions which impact on them. They're those 6 things. If we can bring our decision making and our policy making in Tasmania back to those 6 things, we will be doing an enormous favour to our next generation. Other than that, the Office of the Commissioner is often called upon to provide advice from the perspective of children and young people on legislation, policies, a whole range of issues that are before the community at any time. So that's the work that we do. We draw mainly on the voices of children and young people to inform it. And thank you very much for having me along today. If ever you've got any questions, I run a pretty open and transparent show. Feel free to drop me a line.
So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate that, and please pass on our regards to all your staff as well. And thank you for working in our community as well. It's really appreciated. Thank you very much. Now we move on to petitions. No petitions. No community reports. Danny? No. Yeah, just checking. Public question time. So any questions from the public?
Ron Baines, ratepayer, Kings Meadows. At a previous meeting on agenda item was $1,500,000 for Errol Stewart to build a road from Lindsay Street, and this was withdrawn. The item appears on today's agenda as with $140 cheaper, $140,000 cheaper. I just still wonder why this project wasn't open for tender. And should Errol Stewart contribute?
Well, he has contributed, and it's going to be discussed later in the meeting, and all those matters will come up during discussion by the councillors.
Okay. I also wonder where is the $340,000 that the state roads gave for this project? Does anybody know?
340. There's half the state are putting into it. That's in there. It's in the agenda as well.
Okay. And I also noticed this council has now accepted climate change, for which I can congratulate you. So how can you now allow UTIS to build in the projected flood area, as shown in our Examiner newspaper on the 15th?
Yeah, look, all those matters will be taken into consideration through the DA process. We assess all the information that will be assessed at that time.
So you're saying that the council will listen to the expert opinions that are given here?
We'll listen to the advice given to us, yes.
If council would like that, they can have that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'd just like to pay tribute to past and present Indigenous custodians of this land. My name's Andrew Bowen. I'm from 85 Elizabeth Street. And I'd just like to know from council about, there's an agenda item on the agenda today about changing the celebrations regarding the 26th day of January. I'd just like to know what community consultation has gone on and what community consultation will go on in the future.
Yeah, look, we at our workshop discussed that matter, and it was felt by the councillors we didn't want to go out and do a consultation, a grand consultation and spend money on that, but we've been listening to the people that we speak with, and people have had their chance once it's been in the public to give us their opinions, which I might say we haven't received a lot at all. But
I must say that this last night on the news was the first time that I actually understood that the council was proceeding that way.
Okay.
My family's been a ratepayer in this community for over 150 years, and I would have thought that process would have been out in the public domain. And
that'll
if
be
you hadn't got any feedback, that you would have asked for some feedback.
thank you. They will consider that in our debate as well when it comes up shortly. Any other questions from the public?
My name is Robin Smith. I work at Coffee Republic in the Brisbane Street Mall. The last meeting I asked a question and I got an answer. I've only just read the minutes from that meeting. One of the questions about homeless that are actually sleeping on footpath or in doorways of shops, particularly in Brisbane Street Mall. And you did, I prefaced my question by saying that I in no way related it to the matter that had been raised by, it was Michelle McGurn who used it as a political matter about homelessness. It didn't look good for council, but I did go to the people that actually we spoke of, and the man is very much keen not to be there. He doesn't want to be there at all. He doesn't like it, and he doesn't want to be there. I felt that was important. And the lady with the two dogs was there that very night following the meeting, and she has been back there again. I felt it was important. Do you have a comment to make on that? Because we still seem to have the same level of homelessness in the world.
Well, I can only repeat what I said last time. I have discussed this with two of the charities. They have both approached these people, and one was actually taken away for a period of time but has now come back. So they're obviously not accepting the offers that is going their way, so they keep deciding to be back on the streets. And there's no law to say that we have to push it, keep them in some building and lock them away. They are free to do what they like.
Thank you.
But we are still working with the charities to ensure that we get an overall solution.
Thank you very much. The second question, you kindly suggested that in view that there is an opinion that Brisbane Street Mall isn't quite perhaps what some people hoped for, and certainly compared to Civic Square it perhaps doesn't stand up, not speak for itself. I went around a number of traders and I said to them, following the question I raised, the answer was that it's open for traders to suggest to council what would be of benefit or of interest for the traders, so that they would be in touch with customers. In the past there have been some recommendations made by traders, and they don't seem to have been incorporated into the plans and certainly the executed works.
Can you get to the question, please?
Further than that, what difference would it make if we again said the same things, and I for one have asked, and others have things such as the clock, flags, there are other things that,
I think if you,
that have gone.
how about you put down in writing what those issues are and sign it by all the retailers, and I'm sure we'll take a lot of interest.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the public? So we now move on. So under the provision of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to the item 8 on the agenda as planning authority. So item 8.1. We do have a speaker, I believe, for 8.1. General Manager, if you could read out the rules, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So only residents and ratepayers or those on the City of Launceston electoral roll may address an item on the agenda. Before speaking, please state your name and address or property owned in Launceston. You may speak for up to 2 minutes. No extension of time is permitted. You may speak for or against the recommendation and not ask questions of councillors or council officers or attempt to enter into debate with councillors or council officers. Statements can only be made either directly relating to supporting the recommendations or arguing against it. Comments and statements are not to be defamatory, offensive or abusive, or be designed to embarrass any person, including councillors or council officers. Statements are not to be repetitive of statements or points already made. Several people speaking a common position should nominate a single speaker on their behalf. The Mayor may ask a member of the gallery to cease speaking if the above procedures are not followed, and following hearing the comments from the gallery, councillors will then consider the item.
Thank you, General Manager. I have one here, Sue Balkin.
My husband and I live at 5 Piper Avenue, and 158 Poplar Parade is on our western boundary of our property. As we understand it, permission is being sought for approval to add a second house behind the current brick veneer home. The second house is planned to be 2-storey. Our main concerns centre around the following issues. The proposed building will cast a shadow over up to half our garden. From the top storey, the occupants will have an uninterrupted view into our backyard, and particularly our deck where we relax and barbecue, as well as through our French doors that go through into our living room. Both these dwellings will end up with a very small outside area on the original block. This area of Youngtown is relatively new in its subdivision from the 1990s, and I believe the original town planners had allowed for the size and shapes of the block to suit single-storey and in some cases double-storey dwellings. Splitting a relatively small block, such as this one, to allow a second dwelling introduces a type of cluster living that is against the amenity of the area and sets a poor precedent. No one has been able to clarify our questions about whether the house block is or will be split into 2 blocks in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? That's all I have here. No? So now have item 8.1. Somebody happy to move? Move, Councillor Spencer. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to Councillor Spencer?
Thanks, Matt. There's a few of these ones come up every now and again. This one, there was a height restriction that would cut the height back. It was too high, the original height. Some people will miss out on a bit of an outlook from their properties, but views we can't do anything about. It's not our standard. State government made the rule. We probably in Queensland have got rules against blocking views out, but in this state we haven't. So it's not much we can stop from this project going ahead. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you. We visited the site this morning, and whilst it's probably not the best block that I would have thought to turn into have a second dwelling on, it does meet all the planning requirements, and so therefore, as Councillor Spencer has said, we really are forced somewhat to accept this. The proponent could take us to the appeals tribunal and probably win based on what he's proposing. We have won a small concession in having the height of the unit of the overall development reduced in consultation with the architects, and it is something that the main living viewing area will actually not impose on the Piper Avenue property from what I can see looking at our plans. So hopefully that will put the persons at mind at ease a little. However, I will understand that it will cause them to obviously have a building in their sightline that they no longer have. But that is progress for our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. So just considering the what a highlight window might be. So I understand that there's some concerns about overlooking into through French doors into somebody's living space. But in the comments section, it's indicated there'll be a highlight window in the southern elevation and will avoid overlooking and comply with the standard. Can you speak to what that actually is, please?
Director Hurst.
So on the southern elevation, there is a window that extends along that, but it has a height of 1.7 metres from the floor level, and therefore it's not easily able to look out and see the neighbour's yard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor.
Look, just to say from my perspective, it is unfathomable really that a developer would choose such a small site for the construction of a second dwelling. Knowing the S Group as we do, I trust and hope that we don't see too many more of these squashed premises into small blocks without regard for the neighbours and the amenity of the area. And all I can say is I will be supporting it today because the grounds of refusal are few and far between. But the one comment that really got me in one of the representations was that from their perspective, the view that they currently have and the view that they treasure, there is no means through the scheme to protect that. And so, you know, if it was me, if it was someone I know living in that spot, I'd be concerned, and I'm as equally concerned for those people, those three people who have raised concerns. And I encourage the S Group that provide wonderful services for our community and who pride themselves on relationships and people to work with those three representors to achieve the best outcome as well as for the client, for the neighbourhood.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer, you wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So now we move on to 8 point. No, we don't. No more 8. Sorry. We now no longer sit as a planning authority. Do you want to bring forward the... someone wants to bring forward that item? 15.1. Thank you. Councillor Soward moves 15.1 and seconded by Councillor Walker. So all those in favour that we move forward that item 15.1, that is carried by all. Thank you. So now on to 15.1. We do have a speaker for 15.1, Mr. Graham Gardner.
Yeah, my name is Graham Gardner. I'm the manager of the Aboriginal Land Council of Tasmania. I just want to make a statement today, not so much to question anything that the council is doing, because what I see is quite positive. Australia is the only country that doesn't celebrate its original habits. Its focus has been on the arrival of the British fleet. The national anthem says, "We are young and free." We are not young, and some may argue we're not free. I was privileged to be at the last meeting when this discussion was held, and I did notice that a couple of councillors were somewhat aggrieved, and there was by comments that said, "You've done nothing for us." That is, the local Launceston Council hasn't supported the local Aboriginal community. I would say that where you can, you have. And today's discussion, which is going to be about your role as leaders in the community, about inclusion and a mutual benefit for all will be evidence of that as we progress today. Laurie, then too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No other speakers for item 15.1? So, someone happy to move? Councillor Walker. Seconded. Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Walker?
I do, Mayor. Thank you very much. And I will start before my speech in addressing some of the comments that have come from the floor today. To Mr Andrew Bowen, and I thank you for taking an interest in this item. And you did raise the issue of community consultation. I can certainly assure you that the Council have discussed this in detail. I understand, of course, that's not been a public discussion, and it is a very interesting point, and there were different ideas surrounding that. What I will say, it was discussed in detail, but I would ask you that, whether we would have a community consultation about, continuing to insult a section of our community. It's a difficult thing to do because we're talking about a minority of our community that are affected by a celebration on January 26th. And let me make something very clear also, that Australia Day will still exist. It's not going to disappear. It's not up to this council to make that decision. What we're making a decision about is whether we celebrate that or not. And that celebration is what can be seen as offensive. Now, you're still free, in your own way, to mark that day as you see fit. No one would take that away from you. But what this will do is to say this is a federal gazetted holiday. As some people would say, it does not have anything to do with council, and in that respect, there's no need for council to contribute to that celebration. But I'll go on, and I will also welcome Graham Gardner, a member of our Palaba community, Yapulinginga. As the councillor who brought the initial motion forward to the Launceston City Council to no longer participate in celebrating January 26th, I'm hopeful that today will be a new dawn in the relationship between the Launceston Council and the Launceston community and the Aboriginal community of Tasmania. There are many reasons why I'm proud to be Australian, and I won't list those, but I will say a lack of any meaningful dialogue with our Indigenous communities across Australia is not one of those reasons. Until respectful talk that accepts truth-telling, recognises an Indigenous voice and leads towards the creation of a treaty can happen, as a nation, I don't think we have anything to celebrate. Making January 26th our National Day will never create the inclusive society that the very concept of Australia Day is meant to encompass. A growing number of Australians agree that this is inappropriate, but it's up to the federal government to address that issue and to meet the Aboriginal community as equals. I'm lucky to count members of the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as my friends, and I'm appalled that we continue to celebrate on this day. Of course, we wouldn't celebrate a day such as Anzac Day. We wouldn't celebrate on Armistice Day. This day is a significant day for Aboriginals across Australia. It's the day that their 60,000 years on this land changed forever. It's always been the first issue that I wanted to address when I became a councillor, and so I did bring that up at the start of this year. And I'm glad that the council officers have worked through this issue and our responsibilities and commitments around it, and have brought this back to the table in a responsible and meaningful way. Of course, there's those who want to see it continue, and I'd ask you to consider joining the process of change in our society towards a more inclusive and culturally aware community. Some will argue that this day is gazetted by the federal government, as I said. And if that's the case, then the council has no need to participate in this day. And to Mr Bowen, I'd say, by all means, continue to vote for a federal government that supports the concept of Australia Day, if that's what you truly believe. That is your option. Someone could ask the question, well, what date would replace it? And to those I say, when we have a treaty, we'll have a day worth celebrating. When we meet cultures equally, we'll have a day that is worth celebrating. No one's denying what happened on January 26, 1788. In actual fact, the opposite is true. We're beginning to acknowledge the truth around the significance of that day, not just for the European community or the European colonists and modern Australia, but also to Aboriginal Australia.
Excuse me, Councillor Walker, your time is up. Do you need an extension?
I would like, please.
Councillor Soward moves, seconded Councillor Dawkins. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a minute more, Mayor. We'll still have a national day and we'll still have a public holiday. The things that we're doing today won't change that, and hopefully the things in the future that the federal government do will continue to have a national day to celebrate. It just won't be a day that is disparaging and insulting to a significant proportion of people in our community. So I would like to recommend this motion to the council, and I trust that the councillors around the table have thought long and hard about this, and I wait eagerly to see their response. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. By supporting this motion today, we show our community that we are continuing to listen to the broader community concerns, that we are able to change with the times, that we have been able to have a respectful debate. We have given this due consideration, and I believe this could revitalise the Community Recognition Awards. They haven't been very well patronised in the last couple of years. This is a great opportunity to renew focus on those awards. We continue to have our citizenship ceremonies, which we are so proud of. Going to the Albert Hall, having people from all over the world so proud to become Australian is something that we can all, really get behind, as we all do. So all we're doing by passing this today is taking one more step in a direction which we should have taken a long time ago. We're not going to change the world by doing this, but we're going to show our Aboriginal communities that we see them, that we hear them, and that we want them to be a part of our broader community. We want to always listen, and we want to be able to adapt to change, because we have taken far too long to take these first steps. So I hope this motion passes today. I will be very proud of this council if it does, and I hope that the broader community can learn from our respectful debate of how you can make change. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stojanczyk.
I stand today to wholeheartedly support the motion before us. Firstly, I would like to thank and commend Councillor Walker for his original motion to review how we as a council choose to support the current date of Australia Day. There is some misconception in our community that those who don't choose to celebrate Australia Day on January 26 are somehow un-Australian. I think this couldn't be further from the truth. I'm proudly Australian and would love to have a day when we could all join together to celebrate what it means to be Australian. My dream is that one day in the not too distant future we might be able to find a date that suits all those within our community, the original owners of this land, those who have migrated here from other countries, those who have come here seeking refuge and safety, and those of us who were born here. What a rich and diverse culture we have. Wouldn't it be lovely to celebrate in a way which invites participation from everyone within our community, a day which celebrates our Indigenous culture and our multicultural history? Let's draw on those amazing cultures and not limit ourselves to barbecues, waving the Australian flag from car windows and playing cricket on the beach. I think today sends an important message to everyone in our community that we acknowledge the original owners of this land we are so fortunate to share with them today, and that we want them to feel like they are now part of our community in every way. Some people argue that it doesn't matter what date Australia Day is and we can't change the past, and I agree that we can't change the past, but we can change what we do in the future, and our decision today will hopefully be a step in the right direction. As local government, we have no power to change the date of Australia Day, but we can show leadership by not continuing to celebrate a day which is not a day of celebration for everyone within our community.
Thank you. And I did forget at the beginning to say that in the recommendation, number 6, recommendation, it should read that if recommendation 5 rather than recommendation 6. I think we all understood, but thought I'd make it clear for the record. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to those people that have spoken before me, in particular Mr Gardner. I want to recognise you and the words that you used and the spirit that you entered into that conversation, which is appreciated. The best thing for me that's come out of this discussion was a personal telephone call from Mr Michael Mansell, which I must admit came out of the blue, but was one of enthusiasm and support. Mr Mansell described to me yesterday his wonderment when the media were interviewing him and trying to engage in a story that was, this isn't enough and the council should be promoting for a significant change of date, and that the council should be advocating for a change of date. And his view was, no, this is not the time for that, that this is the City of Launceston taking a positive step forward in working with members of the Tasmanian Aboriginal community to understand, to build and enhance the relationship that exists and to move forward. So it was a call that I received with open arms, and one that I was surprised to receive, but nonetheless one that I hope is indicative of the relationship that we want to enjoy with all members of our Tasmanian Aboriginal community, all groups, all advocates, and all of those who are working so hard to make it a more inclusive Tasmania and Australia. So I look forward, as other councillors have indicated would be the way forward, I look forward to a more meaningful relationship if this motion is supported today. I understand it won't please everyone in our community, but it is a way of us extending the hand and saying that we are wanting to continue to build a relationship with Tasmania's Aboriginal people, and we are wanting to work to be a more inclusive Tasmania and a more inclusive Launceston.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other speakers? Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to again support and thank and commend, we're all the same word, Councillor Walker for raising this. And back in January, like I did before, I will be supporting this motion. From my point of view, I won't go into the details of the dates and everything, but it's a sign of leadership that you've shown, and a sign of leadership that I think we will all support. It's a show of great respect. It's a show of inclusiveness. As I mentioned before, by passing this motion, we show we care. And by doing so, we'll all be one step closer to hopefully feeling all truly Australian. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dakin. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, and I echo many of the sentiments of previous speakers, and to commend Councillor Walker for bringing the matter forward. I want to just start with the concerns raised by the speaker who spoke right at the very start, expressing some concern that council hadn't gone out with a survey or other mechanisms to test public opinion. And I really do take his point. Having been around this table for nearly 10 years and long serving like some others here, it's interesting that when council, if you like, have gone out to the community before and consulted, we've been criticised. We've been criticised for wasting money. We've been criticised because people have said to me and others, what do we vote for you for? We don't vote for you to keep coming and ask us. We vote for you to make some decisions. And one of the great things that I'm really proud of with this council, and this council in particular, is its level of engagement with its community. One of the great things, I guess good or bad with technology, Mr Mayor, is people can access us all the time. We get text messages, we get phone calls, we get Facebook messages, we get approached via email, phone calls, where people do ask questions. And when this matter came to us before, I think it was about the 24th or 25th of January, Councillor Walker, 24th? Not a bad guess, that's good. I didn't remember what the date was yesterday, but I remember that one. That's terrific. Well done me. But we had a great discussion, a really great discussion around it. So it was something that was in the public domain at that time. It's not something that's just a new thing. And I know for one, and I'm sure other councillors have had the same, Mr Mayor, where people have contacted us with their views on this particular issue. Not necessarily this week, but over time and before Councillor Walker brought that notice of motion. So while I do understand, the disappointment expressed by the long-serving ratepayer that there wasn't a survey that went out or some other mechanism, I do think that this council is well enough connected into its community to represent its views. And as I said, all of us are from different backgrounds and bring different skills, and people have had an opportunity. And like I said, having sat around this table before where councillors have said, let's go and consult, and then been criticised when we've done that because people have said you're elected to make a decision is something that's interesting. For me, I'll go to the remarks from the Deputy when he talked about the conversation he had with Mr Mansell. I share a very, very similar view to the one that Mr Mansell expressed to the Deputy in terms of one of the things I've found very frustrating about this issue is that the people I talk to, there are many, many people who share the view that this date is offensive. Many people say that to me. But where the challenge has been is where it's become just very aggressive and conflictive and emotive, and that's taken really away from the issue. Do you know what I mean? People get caught up in all of that stuff rather than dealing with the matters before us today. So with Mr Mansell's remarks, I think that's very, very, I regard his remarks very, very well and share similar sentiments. I think, Mr Mayor, in what we've got in front of us in the numerous recommendations is that it's a way we are representing the opinions of the community. Again, from the feedback I've had, what's in front of me here today, I'm very, very comfortable in going back to people and explaining and defending and supporting, and I think that a lot of people would understand where we're coming from. The point that I made last time, and I will make again today, because again, it's one of these strange things. You know, there's little things that press our buttons, I guess, as people. I always found it fascinating, long before I sat around this table as a student, that Australia Day, the day Australia Day, was given to the name that the colony of New South Wales was settled in 1788. I always found that really strange. 26th of January 1788, colony of New South Wales. The other thing, Mr Mayor, and I've made this point before, and I know Councillor Walker is very passionate, and I do agree with him about the idea of another day, and perhaps it could be that treaty day that you talked about. But again, it is absolutely indisputable that the Commonwealth of Australia, didn't exist until the 1st of January 1901. Okay, it didn't exist. So, you know, the idea of an Australia Day, calling it Australia Day being on another date, it just makes no sense to me. Like, if you're going to be really technical to the letter of the law and say, right, when did the country exist? It has to be the 1st of January. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, because I reckon if you keep saying stuff, people hopefully take notice. When I've flagged and advocated for that, I've had people say to me, but that's a holiday anyway, Rob. We miss out on a holiday. Crazy. It's not about holidays. It's about doing the right thing. And I too want to recognise you, Mr Gardner. I know you from a long time and your passion and advocacy on this issue. I'm very happy to support it, Mr Mayor. I'm about to sit down because my time's up. But again, I think it's a great thing we're having this discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Soward. Councillor Harris?
Thank you, and thank you to all the previous speakers. You've taken all my notes. I think probably the biggest comment I will say is about the community engagement I've had, and that is many people have spoken to me about asking why we are changing Australia Day, and I have said to them we are not changing the date of Australia Day. Only the federal government can do that, and only pressure from councils and other people within the community can actually make the federal government reconsider that day. So the work that we're doing here today, I was surprised when we did the audit of how much we didn't do for Australia Day as a council. I found that there was only 3 or 4 small items we did other than the citizenship ceremony, and that surprised me as a new councillor. I thought we did more, but there you go, that was my perception. The changes that we have made, I think, are reflective of our community, and I think that will be accepted by the community, because certainly when I've detailed those changes back to people who ask me why am I changing Australia Day, they have all accepted that in a positive manner. And for Mr Gardner, I'm not sure if I played cricket against you or not, but I probably did at TCL level. Probably nearly bowled me over. I also had read an article in the internet, I'm sure, about changing the national anthem from "For We Are Young and Free" to perhaps changing it to "We Are One and free. And perhaps that makes a very nice change to recognise that the young part was because Australia was a young country, but as one country we celebrate 60,000 years of our thing. So with that, I'll be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay.
Thanks, Mayor. There's been some highlight today around community leadership on this issue, and I think it's really important to note that when a conversation occurs at a time of the year where there isn't a political pressure or tension, a great conversation can occur. I think Councillor Dawkins commented on the fact that the community will reflect on this as being a respectful conversation. That earlier when council considered this matter at the table, I felt awkward. I felt like I'd been pushed into a place that was uncomfortable because the political nature of the timing was significant. And so I believe, and I would like to reflect that, when it returns to the table at a period without that, we can actually sit down together and work together in the workshop environment and at the council table. For me, it's really important to acknowledge that as a council, we do have a great history of building relationships and working to understand, and that it's something that as a council I think we do really, really well. And for me, as a bridge builder and a connector, I did find the conversation complicated in the past because acknowledging there are many people in our community that remain committed to the content and the character of Australia Day. But of course, we need to continue to work to join in and understand and reflect and grow from these experiences. So for me, acknowledging that Australia Day remains the realm of the Australian Government, that any decisions taken will need to be considered by the City of Launceston, that this decision for a year going forward allows us to continue to have a calm place to continue these conversations and also relationships that we build, and that the changes I've made reflect many in our community and provide for an opportunity to create that trust and that relationship and build that going forward. I think it's also important that as an organisation, as we have these conversations with many communities, we work towards a positive reconciliation action plan, and I'm really looking forward to that moment in our council's future.
Thank you, Councillor Finlay. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor, if you'd have the... Yeah, I want to say that when I first got on council, which is 14 years ago, I probably would not have definitely not support this, and I wouldn't have made the statements I've made at the last time when we discussed Australia Day, and I don't want to go over all that because I am so thankful of the opportunity that I have had to be involved in discussions with the community and to have my eyes opened up to certain things in our community, and I think that's what's important to me. And the thing that I've learned as growing up, I was very naive to what really did happen on the 26th of January many years ago. I didn't understand it. I didn't really know what it was. And I think what I've been thankful for, the experience that I've had with talking to people and listening to people such as Graham Gardner and others to really understand what went on then. And I think anybody that knows what did happen on the 26th of January, when people were killed, slaughtered, murdered, we can go on and on and on, which is very sad. And it's something, how can we then, as a country, want to be one and continue to celebrate that day? Now, I'm not going to say which day it should be, but there are other days that I think are just more appropriate than even the 26th of January. And let's not forget that the 26th of January we've only had since about 20 years, 30 years, as the day. Before we just used to celebrate the last long weekend in January. We didn't have a specific date. We only had this issue when we tried to pick a date, and we picked probably one of the most difficult dates for a certain group of people in our community, which to me is sad. But I want to say that, so I'm more than happy to support this motion because what it does say also, it's a privilege for us as a council to have citizenship ceremonies. It really is, and it's not for us just to do on our own. We are allocated that by the federal government, and that's a privilege that we get to be able to do that. And I must say it's one of the most enjoyable jobs as mayor that you can do, to have these citizenship ceremonies and with the people. So being a privilege, the motion does say very clearly that if the Australian federal government decides, as it has talked about, adopting that we must do it on the 26th of January, we will do it on the 26th of January. That's what it says. Let's make that quite clear. If it says we must, we will. If not, we will do it on the 25th of January. And I think there are good reasons for that which have been said, so I won't go over that. I just want to point out, we are not the only council to do this, and just our neighbours, West Tamar Council, already do it on the 25th of January. Dorset Council, just another one of our neighbours, already do it on the 25th of January. So we're not setting some huge trend here. What we're doing is really just making a clear statement that if we want to celebrate with all people, and we believe it's best not to be done on the 26th of January, we would love it as a council, as we've made that statement and we've written to the politicians, if they will change the date, if they won't, then we've got to live with it, and we will continue to work with the federal government. More than happy to do that, and understand that we will hold the citizenship ceremony on the 25th, unless we are mandated, told to do it on the 26th, then we will do it on the 26th, and that will be for the federal government to determine, and not for us. And probably lastly, I just want to say to the community, I know there's quite a few of my supporters that weren't happy last time I made my statement. I was quite aware of that, got a few phone calls and comments. But I do ask people, sit down and read the history of this great, great, great country that we have. Why can't it be a day that we can pick for all of us and then truly celebrate as one? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Back to you.
Speakers? Councillor Walker, you wish to close?
I do, Mayor, and I must say it has been quite moving to listen to everyone around the table make their contributions, and I do take the points on board from the councillors, the notion that this is certainly a less contentious time for us to consider this motion. I thank the work of our council officers who have worked through these issues. I will also, address our community and reiterate, as I said before, that this does not mean that we, as is sometimes reported, that we're banning Australia Day, or people will celebrate this day in their own way, but people might also one day look to the 19th of September 2019 when we make this decision, and they might think that is a day that's quite significant. That is a day that's worth celebrating. That's a day that Launceston City Council took a step forward towards reconciling with their Indigenous brothers and sisters. So, as I say, I'm finding this a little bit emotional, so I shall conclude there, and I thank everyone for their contribution.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. Deputy, if you take the chair, I might just do a media thing. Are you happy to do the chair?
Sure.
Yeah, I can do mine later, announcements later.
Okay, thank you. We're going to skip 9.1 and move to item 10, councillors' reports. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Deputy. I want to just touch on something very, very briefly that I know you yourself, the Mayor, Councillor Finlay, Councillor Walker and myself were at yesterday, and that was the Waste Not Awards at the casino. I just wanted to just take a minute to highlight a couple of things, and there were a couple of things that particularly resonated with me, Deputy. I often speak around this table with problems that come into us that we all have to be, as in all of our community, not just the people around this table, need to be part of the solution. And the overall winner yesterday, Mr Polton and his family, believe it or not, condensed what they throw away in their garbage bin to a bread bag. So they compost stuff, they recycle stuff, they reuse stuff. That to me, that's just so powerful, because it's not people out there saying the council's got to fix it or you've got to do this. It's people saying, you know what, this is a problem and we're going to play our part. And I know that was very, very powerful for me to sit there with the councillors I mentioned and hear that. The other really powerful thing for me, and I know I saw the reaction of our councillors I mentioned, to the first prize winner, a 6-year-old student who had led initiatives in our community to clean up stuff, and as the Mayor himself said when he spoke, not her stuff, not her rubbish, but the rubbish of other people, the stuff that other people have thrown out and thrown on the ground. And I know I've spoken about this before when I've highlighted clean-up works. So it was great to be there, Deputy. Wonderful effort from our staff in their role in making that happen, but just for me a real buzz in seeing members of our community doing their bit to reduce the problem that is rubbish. but also that really wonderful thing of being part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Soward. Any other councillors who have items to report? Councillor Finlay.
I'm going to take a moment, if I can, to report and promote. Obviously, today starts the NBL Blitz in Tasmania, and that's something that for all Launcestonians and this council we've been a great supporter of. First games tonight start in Launceston, but today, yesterday, there have been players that play in the NBL and the NBA in our town with our school children. They've been in primary schools. They're at Riverside Primary School today. Adam Gibson, Launceston-born Olympian, is in here playing basketball with kids of the future, which is super, super exciting. So if I can, tonight in Ulverston, Devonport tomorrow night, but Saturday night at the Silverdome, we've got the Cairns, the Taipans, and we've got the NBL 1 All-Stars, and we've got the Adelaide, and we've got someone else.
Sorry.
But yeah, for anyone that's listening or wants to get along, it's super exciting, and it means a lot. We know what sport does for connecting and growing community. So this is the beginning of potentially, hopefully, a really big future for basketball in Tassie with the NBL creating a home team here.
The basketballs are usually tall people if you're not sure what they look like.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Finlay, and for the clarification, Councillor Soward. Any additional reports from around the table? Let's move to item 11, 11.1. 11.1.1 is listed. 11.2, Councillor Spencer.
Question.
Correct.
Just wondering, yes, Deputy, just wondering the land and building where the new car museum is, who actually owns it?
General Manager.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. It's currently owned in the name of UTAS, and obviously it's part of the instrument of transfer that we're working through with UTAS for that to come across to council ownership once as part of the overall transfer to facilitate university development.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No further questions. Let's move to item 13, 13.1, Council Workshop Report. Moved by Councillor Soward, seconder. Councillor Harris. Councillor Soward, do you wish to speak? Councillor Harris? Any councillor wish to speak to item 13.1? All those in favour, please raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. Over we go to item 17.1, the lease of one of our icons, the Princess Theatre and Earl Arts Centre. Have someone move the motion? Councillor Soward. Someone to second the motion? Thank you, Councillor Finlay. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Deputy. Just briefly, it's obviously very, very straightforward, but it takes us through the process that has been undertaken. It explains in the report, just to provide a process for if anyone's out there listening wondering what's going on. It talks about the Princess Theatre and Earl Arts Centre being leased to Theatre North by reason of a lease dated 12th of March 2008. The lease was extended. Currently operating a month-by-month tenancy. 8th of August 2019, Council resolved and intended to lease the property for a period of 5 years. And as we work our way through, it just talks about the compliance with the relevant section of the Local Government Act, the process we undertook again per the Act, the advertisement and so forth. It also talks about the way that the draft lease alters the way in which funds are paid to and received from the theatre. Again, as you quite rightly said, Deputy, when you introduced the item, the Princess Theatre and the Earl Arts Centre are just extremely important facilities in our city. There's some wonderful work that goes on there, some very high standard shows, but also a range of activities as well, from professional shows to the competitions and other junior groups that use it, and visiting groups as well that come in as part of the Theatre North subscription season. So great venues, do some great work, and obviously the lease is a very, very important part of that to bring surety to the work that they do. So I'm very, very happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Soward. Seconder, Councillor Finlay, do you wish to speak? Councillor Finlay? No. Any other councillor wish to speak? All those in favour, please raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. Over to item 20.1, the Launceston Flood Authority Rules Amendment. I have no speakers for the item. Someone to move the item? Councillor Soward. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Soward, do you wish to speak to the item?
Thanks, Deputy. Very, very straightforward. It spells out very, very clearly what's going on in the report. The LFA was established by Council as a single authority under Section 30 of the Local Government Act 1993. It takes us through what's happened there. The matter's previously been considered, I'm making words up now, considered by the Council. However, subsequent to Council's decision, officers did identify that there were some procedural matters that needed attending to. So it was therefore necessary for Council to consider this matter again. The purpose of the recommendations under consideration is just to consolidate the rules and the various purported amendments to ensure that they meet the contemporary requirements of the LFA and are enacted in accordance with the law. It mentions there that in 2018 Paul Arnold was commissioned to undertake a review of the future of the LFA, a copy of which has been attached there and is available for people to see. And in summary, it says the review found the construction phase of the levee is now complete, maintenance activities have been delegated to council officers, and that there is no formal structure to maintain the integrity of the protection system. The review concluded that many of the functions of the LFA are better placed with council, and that the opportunities for the LFA are the high-level independent monitoring of the effectiveness of the system and advising senior officers on issues. Accordingly, the review proposes to change the focus, and again, coming back to what I said before, it's just keeping the operation of it contemporary. So it's all there, very straightforward. It's been available online. I must admit, Deputy, I haven't had hundreds of phone calls or lots of emails with concern on this one. Just a very important procedural thing that we do, and obviously very happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Soward. Councillor Harris, as the seconder, do you wish to speak? Any of my colleagues wish to speak to item 20.1? No? All those in favour, please raise their hand. That is all councillors present, and the motion is carried. Item 20.2, King Wharf Developments. No speakers for the item. Someone to move the item? Councillor Spencer. Are you moving it as is? Someone to... So we need a mover first. Someone to move the motion. Councillor Finlay, thank you. Someone to second. Councillor Soward, thank you. Councillor Finlay, as the mover, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Deputy. I do. This is the second time this item has been before us, removed from the agenda last time, but with full disclosure to the community in terms of the content, and then this time again for Council. I believe that it is an alignment in terms of full disclosure from Council, not only disclosing the project, but the proponent and also the full costs. I believe in terms of timing, this follows on from a previous decision of Council where the commitment to the road was made. There is no doubt that there is pressure in the traffic system in the area, and a solution as soon as possible is important for Council to enact. By being able to engage the developer to complete the development of the roadworks subject to council scrutiny and specifications, I believe is the best outcome not only for the immediate area but also for the greater community in terms of delivering on previous decisions from council.
Thank you, Councillor Finlay. Seconder, Mr Mayor, is Councillor Soward. I'll invite him to speak before... Okay, thank you, Councillor Soward. Thank you. Any councillors? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Deputy. After obtaining a couple of schedules off the one of the council officers, I showed a contractor the estimated costs. He came back to me and said he could do better prices. I came to this council to get a fair tender process. In my opinion, jobs like this should be open tendered. One other contractor asked me, why isn't this an open tender? And I explained to him what was going on. We definitely need this road. It's definitely required. No worries about it. This will benefit the developer in future projects that he's got planned. The developer has been a great asset to Launceston. Great. Developer is not contributing enough finances to this road. Ground levels do not match existing drainage. This is not a problem. The infrastructure services stated that it would be better if the developer did the road. That doesn't go down with me. Any person can come in and do people's work. The road drainage is already there, so all the levels are pretty easy to follow up. The council states in a report about Lindsay Street, the next 5 years it will be critical congested, not urgent at the moment. The road was purchased off the developer for a larger value than what it was valued at the block next door. The developer contribution should be much higher than it is. I will not accept this as it is, and will be voting against it. Myself, council officers and Tim and myself asked a question to negotiate, and we came back with a better figure, and this is a great outcome for the council, saving us $140,000. The way it is, without a proper tender, I cannot not support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Anyone else around the table like to speak? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I will echo Councillor Spencer's comments somewhat. I too am concerned around the appearance that this arrangement has had. That may or may not be shared by other people in the community or other people around this table, but it does not negate the fact that we're paying for a road to be built by a developer that will naturally benefit from that road. Of course, the whole community will benefit from that road after the council bought that land from that developer. That's unfortunate. It doesn't mean that anything untoward happened. No one is suggesting that. No one is suggesting impropriety. What, unfortunately, it can lend itself to the perception of partiality. There may well be nothing wrong with that. I do thank my fellow councillor Paul Spencer for fighting for an equitable outcome. In consideration of the clear benefit that this road does bring the community, he still stood up to fight that, and as is apparent, that action would appear to be saving us $140,000. I echo his call for future works of this nature to be tendered. I understand that there's a necessity for this road to be built, but at the same time, we have waited a number of months for this to happen, and I'm sure we could have waited a number of months more. We must always strive to be better as a council, and I'm sure everyone would agree with that, to be more efficient, to be more transparent, and not just to be impartial, but to be overwhelmingly perceived as being impartial. And that is perhaps where I have a problem with this, is the perception. As I say, no one is accusing anyone of impropriety. And unfortunately, without this going to tender, we've lost that opportunity. So I can't support this recommendation today. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Deputy. I'll just sort of start with the back end of the previous people who have indicated that they're not going to support this. When I first read this item, I went straight to the legal opinion that's provided in the documents for us. And obviously, it's very, very important in a position where council is making a decision to make sure, of course, it's making that decision, obviously a legal one. So the opinion that's available there publicly for the whole world to see goes through some things. And I just note, Deputy, in my remarks that the opinion provided to us by Geoffrey Tremaine. Mr Tremaine is a long-serving practitioner, I think of around about 37 years, former president of the Law Society, very senior person in this area. So wise person once said to me, if you get legal advice, it's always a good idea to follow it. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of things there. And the concern that is raised by those that aren't going to support it, they're talking about, the fact that perhaps, by not tendering for it, that, that's obviously not a really good thing. And in one way, it's not a really good thing because it's not open to everyone to put their hand up. So what we've asked the legal counsel to provide us is an opinion on that. And we've said that under Section 33A of the Local Government Act, are we in breach of it by not tendering it? Well, the legal opinion comes back in a lot of detail, and it says that in this particular instance, in the opinion of the lawyer providing the opinion, the senior lawyer, it says that it doesn't apply in the case of the road. So we've asked, we've got some advice that said, does that provision around the tendering apply in this case? And the lawyers given us some indication there, and they sum up their remarks with, we see no conflict with the tendering provisions in the LGA, the Local Government Act, or what the council is proposing to do concerning the road. So that gave me some comfort, Deputy. As I said, one of the things you learn, all of us learn, I'm sure, as people around this table, is that we learn there are a lot of people out there without any legal qualifications or even planning qualifications or any knowledge of the planning scheme who are very quick to tell us, how it works. I think some of them put their tinfoil hats on and jump away on their keyboards and away they go. I'd read some of those remarks today about this very matter. So I've dealt with the legal opinion on our ability of what we need to do. I agree with Councillor Walker. Perception is an important thing, and he's made a very, very good point there. But I'd also say that one of the things about perception as well is sometimes people will, not saying Councillor Walker, but sometimes people out in the community will look for things that aren't there, and they keep looking at something and they get 1 + 1 and they add it up to 37 and they tie it in with the dinosaur extinction and all of a sudden this is what's going to happen. So the matter before us today, for me, the most important thing for me to consider, as I said, is that legal opinion. What we're doing is okay as far as that tender process. It's obviously something that came before this previous council, and it's something that is a very, very important thing to occur. So obviously I'll be supporting that. I want to just touch on something. I want to acknowledge the passion and advocacy for Councillor Spencer. He's someone who, as he said, he's been a person of his word. He ran for election on the idea of, getting the best value for the ratepayer, and I'd say, Councillor Spencer, that reflects great credit on you because you're always a strong advocate for that. I'd also say that every councillor around this table tries to do the same thing, for sure. One of the frustrations I have, not with you, Councillor Spencer, but it's very easy sometimes with people, and we all get this, where people out there will tell us when we build seats or when we build a stadium or when we put a PA in somewhere, that whatever we pay for it's too much. And that's, as I said, your passion and advocacy in trying to pursue that better deal reflects great credit on you. But I do know, having spoken to people, I'm reminded of a saying that my late mother used to say, and that was, nothing's impossible if you don't have to do it. So it's very, very easy for people to say how much things will cost if they aren't going to do them. And people always tell us when we do things as a council that they cost too much and we could do them cheaper. So I'm going to support it. I do recognise the contributions made by those who won't be supporting it, and I do agree with the sentiment they've expressed. But for me, we're acting lawfully. We don't need to go to tender on this matter. The work we're doing is very, very important, and I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Soward. Councillor Harris.
Thank you. I have a question first, if I can. In regard to the completed road, what sort of warranty period or otherwise would apply for the road when it's handed to us? Does it have 12 months, 5 year, that the developer would have to repair the road?
Listen, I haven't got that information in hand. Obviously, it would be a contract that we would enter, so we can define a period that the council may choose. So I think we would generally say 12 months, I think is what we would generally say. So that's what I would stand here today to say we would include in the contract.
Thanks, General Manager.
Thank you for that. Speak now. Look, thank you for that. This has been ongoing, as the other speakers have mentioned, for some time, prior to my time here on council. For those of you who've been in the Lindsay Street area on a Saturday, or most weekdays in fact, it certainly needs something. to get the traffic out of there. And whilst we may not have our Inveresk traffic plan completed, this at least will make a start and make some way for traffic to get out of that area other than back through the traffic lights with Godrich Street. And ultimately they will be able to access through to Foster Street and beyond. And I'll agree with many other comments about whilst a formal process would have definitely been a preferred model on this one, the Council's legal opinion and its own estimates say that this is a reasonable and fair price. I think we seem to have got a good deal. We have reduced the price by $140,000. We have, if they find in the construction of the road they can do it cheaper, we benefit from that, and the state government will be paying half of whatever contribution is required from us to the developer. So in reality, as a developer or as the person paying the bill, I think we have a very good deal in place. I think it was a good deal to buy the land early rather than having to acquire it. And that will prove to be a smart and a cost-saving exercise as well. So my congratulations to the council there. And I just think it's time that we move forward and stop procrastinating on this matter. So I'll be voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Daking.
Thank you, Deputy. I, like my fellow councillors, probably going to repeat, and I'll try not to. We have professional legal advice that clearly states the requirement of a tender process is not required. I know that Councillor Sandler and the other councillors have clearly stated that. Our great staff have quantified the cost, our professional staff internal have quantified the cost of the contract. The contract benefits are there, that we will have the upside if there's any potential savings. 50%, as you said, 50% contribution to the state government. Now I'm pretty sure they're not going to throw us 50% of the money if it's not well spent and it's not contracted and quantified properly. We need this road. We needed it yesterday. We needed it before yesterday. So in summary, the price is right, the conditions are right, the funding's right, the road is absolutely needed. This decision is the most effective way to deliver that. Why would we go slow, go against our own legal advice, go against our own professional staff, when we can simply get on and build this road and start using it? The community benefit far outweighs anything else.
Thank you, Councillor Daking. Any other contributions from around the table? Councillor Finlay, do you wish to close?
I was prepared to close, but I think Councillor Daking did a very good job of the summary. It is, for clarification of language, it is a formal process, it's a legal process, it's a process that has scrutiny and it's fully disclosed in terms of transparency. I commend the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Finlay. All those for, please raise their hand. Those against, please raise their hand. The motion is carried 8-2 with Councillor Walker and Councillor Spencer voting against it. To item 9.1.
Thank you, Deputy, for chairing that. Can I just say it was announced, I haven't got a lot of announcements, but I just want to say Junction was absolutely fantastic in the period. And again, as I'm learning in this role, I've been challenged with different productions and theatre. So it was really great to go along to Breathtaking, for example, at Junction Arts, and to see something different and to accept the talent and the skills that we have in our community in different areas. So that was good. And there was a number of others, and the concert actually in St John's on the Thursday night was absolutely fantastic as well. So yeah, some great events and well attended. The ones I went to were well attended. Also on the Sunday the 8th, I did go to the Northern competitions presentation for the Northern Hockey Centre. And General Manager, just to let you know, a warning, and Councillor Soward is aware of this as well, that they're working on a proposal and want some, obviously, council to do some work up there as well and to help grow that facility even more. So, and probably want some funding for an event they've got coming up very soon. So there will be a request coming in for probably about 15 to 20,000, is my understanding of it. So something to keep a lookout for, but they are very pleased with that centre, but they do want us to continue to work together on that, which I'm sure we're happy to do. And probably just close by some, I'm not sure what was said before, the Waste Not Awards, as have been mentioned already by others, so it was absolutely fantastic, great event, and congratulations to our staff, General Manager. Our staff do an absolutely amazing job with those awards, and what we are doing now, promoting in our community, is absolutely fantastic, and so many people have taken that initiative. Schools, it's great to see the younger ones and the schools involved, so all goes well for the future of less landfill for us, which would be fantastic. Isn't it amazing how a family can get from a whole, what do you call those things? Garbage, whatever we call it, into one little, or half a bread bag. Absolutely amazing. So if we could all do that, imagine the landfill would last us another 40 years or more. So that'd be fantastic. So that's my section.
Question, Mr Mayor. Could I ask you a question? Are you aware that no one mentioned Macquarie House because we saved it for you?
Sorry about that. I thought I'd go quick to the end. Well, what happened there? No, sorry. Yeah, look, it's a real pleasure last Saturday, the 14th, to actually have the Prime Minister in town, and that was a last-minute addition to the proposal for the day. And absolutely fantastic, and it was great to see the support we're getting. And Macquarie House was a long time coming. I think we're going back to 2006 somewhere or something like that, so it's an absolutely long process to get here, but an absolutely amazing job. To go through that building is absolutely fantastic, and there's so many people involved in that. I'm not going to mention one name because I'll forget quite a few. So to everybody involved, general manager, to our staff and outside that have helped, in different senators, etc., been right through the community, Liberal Party, etc. It's been absolutely fantastic and a credit to everybody. Can I say also I'm really looking forward to hearing some great stories of new inventions, of new innovations, of new ideas and thoughts, and how people can be working together. This city is full of those. We know that Macquarie House has got a history of obviously storing goods and equipment, goods and food, etc. that went to Melbourne when we first founded Melbourne. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot more goods and things come out of that when we find and found, who knows, other things in this great world that we've got. So fantastic, a great credit to our council for the day. Thank you to Simon and the team for helping with all the changes that we had to continue to have. A great day, and it was really encouraging to have the Prime Minister in town and to be staying at the silos, and for his children to be, while he was here doing a formality, were part of Riverbend Park, and they loved it, thought it was fantastic. So I saw them later on at the football, their children, because I was at the NTFA Grand Final as well, and the children were there and they just loved Riverbend Park. So a great endorsement, and for the Prime Minister to see where their $6 million went. It was great to see that and to be encouraged by that. So yeah, a great day and a great Macquarie House that's going to go on. There are some in our community which I will have shared with the General Manager that would maybe change the name of Macquarie House. I'm not sure about that. We'll have a discussion on that in due course. So who knows? Thank you. Thanks, Deputy. So where are we up to, Deputy? We're finished. Close the meeting. Close this. Sorry. Sorry. For what? What? Yeah, so sorry, now we have a motion to go into closed council. Moved Councillor Sowers, second Councillor Finlay. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is carried by all. Thank you.
Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
Open. Is it there? Yep. Oh, cool. Someone happy to move that? Move Councillor Sauer, second Councillor Stosniak. All those in favour, raise your hand. That is carried. Thank you. We'll close the meeting. All right, I think I'll Simon, he listened.
How did the interview go, Simon?
Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m.